Hey, Lise.
Hey, Jay.
I wanted to talk to you about the Rogers change model because I know it's one that a lot of people use, but you've got a really interesting take on it. And I thought maybe a good place to start is, can you just remind people what is the Rogers change model?
So it's just that standard bell curve that talks about how fast people get on board to change. So something new happens and, there's people at one end who are excited and they're like, yep, I'm in. And there are people down the other end who are like, not on my watch. And then there's that group in the middle that nobody really understands. When we go and work in organisations, they're excited by the people that are ready and raring to go. And they are less excited, let's say, about the people who are incredibly resistant. The blame falls with the people. They're laggards, they're not on board, so that's on them. But, for the people who are maybe innovators, the ones who are right at that other end, it's like, oh, look at a good job we've done engaging our people in change.
Yeah.
And actually neither story is true.
And you don't like that language either. You don't like the early adopter, laggard. You don't buy into any of that.
Well, do you know what? I think they've become, just like any name calling, kind of weapons. And somebody who's slow to embrace one thing might be incredibly fast to embrace another. So, you start calling them a laggard, and now they might start thinking they're a laggard. You might actually increase their resistance to any change when, maybe you can just start talking about the rate at which people get on board.
Do you think it's still useful, though, to think in terms of where people are relative to whatever change you're talking about? Does that still apply, that model?
I think it does, but I think, it's a curve for a reason. It's not camps, it's a curve, and everybody's at a different place along there. So if you think about any group that we go and work with on change, the one thing we'll know is that there's probably three different discussions you have to have. And the first one is why. So why are we doing this change? Why is it important? Why will our organisation or our clients or the world be better off as a result of this change? And you know what? The second people hook onto why, they're ready for another conversation.
That one's got to be first.
It's
got to be first. I'm not interested in how if I haven't been convinced why.
I think we've seen organisations that don't do the why. But if you think about the next conversation, which is what, so what is it going to look like? What does it entail? What extent does that piece of the puzzle enable us to achieve that why? So the why is the filter for every piece of work you do after that.
And that's interesting because I think you can get stuck on what, because what's really where you start having the detail.
Yeah.
I mean, you can describe why in a breath. Like it's to build a better future or to create a fairer society. I mean, it doesn't have to be a very big thing to describe why.
The next conversation, if you understand why the change has to happen, if you understand what it's going to look like, then it's simply a conversation of how will we make that happen? And
yeah.
It's easy. If you've really been comprehensive in your what, the how is the easiest conversation that you could ever have. Those people up the front end, those early adopters or those innovators, all they need is the how. If they're ready for action, they understand why. And they may have needed it to be explained to them, or they may intuitively have just got it because, they've been paying attention. They understand what needs to change, and now it's just how will I make it happen. If you think about the people down the other end, they're the ones who need to understand why. Like if they're not even taking a step towards this thing, you didn't get them.
When you look at what happens at Silicon Valley, and they're going to come up with the fancy new device, whatever it is, they know that they don't have to spend a lot of time marketing to, adolescent boys, because they know that they're going to be lined up outside the shop in the sleeping bag for days. Just tell them how they can get their hands on this thing. And at the same time, they don't spend time trying to convince the Amish that they should move from, 16th century technology to 21st century technology. And they put all of their marketing in the middle. What we want to do is convince the largest number of people to take a step towards this thing. And I wonder whether that's the same thing that you were saying.
That big group in the middle, they're the ones who need the what conversation.
Every time we've been in front of a group, and I think about the front rows are the people who are just keen to go. And they turned up early and they're bright-eyed and they're paying attention and they just want to know how. So when we're talking about innovation and change and we start off by talking about the why and the what, you can see them going, yeah, get to how. like they're just keen. And then the people who are in the middle of the room, which is most of them, you know, they're sitting back a little bit. They're not quite so keen, but they're going, okay, well, I need to hear a bit more about this. I'm not sure. And then you've got the people who are right at the back of the room. And if you talk to them, they'll say, I still don't know why we're doing this. And it couldn't be clearer. You know, that change model actually shows you where people are going to be in the room.
Yeah, but the funny thing about that is, so what do we do at the start of the session when we see all those empty chairs at the front? We have people saying, come on, everyone, move forward. And we think we're just asking them to change chairs, but we're not. We're asking them to change the way they think or the way they feel about this meeting that they've been invited to or this workshop that they've been invited to. I think you can ask them to move after the session's been going for a while.
Yeah.
You know, we see that,
That's so
if
funny.
you ask people to move in a row, they're not going to move. But, you know, after a half an hour, if you ask them to do an activity, they move everywhere. They move the chairs, they move themselves, they change their mind.
They've had a chance to have a sniff at it and to go, okay, all right, I'm starting to see why now I can engage.
Yeah.
But if we don't do that, then you're charging into the future and they're so far behind, they're just not going to catch up.
Yeah. And so I guess the challenge for organisations is that, yes, the why is important. Luckily, I agree with you. It does not take long to communicate the why. And, you know, maybe you need to communicate it in a number of different ways so that people can get on board. But yeah, don't need to spend much time there. Don't need to spend a whole lot of time trying to, you know, move into the how space. You've really got to be able to focus on the what, which, by the way, is that big group. And once you get them, the change is inevitable. The outcomes are inevitable.
So that tells you what the comm should be in each one of those cases and where you need to target your messaging and the sequencing of those messages. And I think I know the way you're going to answer this because I know you pretty well, but I've seen people overlay, you know, Gen X and Gen Y and baby boom and millennials onto that model, you know, that the young ones are at the front and the oldies are at the back. Do you see that?
I don't see that. But I do think there's some insight to be gained from the kind of place you grew up in, what school was like for you and what your first job was like. I think that has an impact for you in the way that you operate with teams and the way you embrace change in different ways. But I think that might be a discussion for a whole other 5 minutes.
Oh, absolutely. Let's do that. I would love to pull that apart.